Hello, and welcome back to LV Scary Stories. I know some people may stumble across my channel and assume that my stories are taken from forums like Reddit. But let me assure you, these stories are completely original for this YouTube channel. Feel free to search the internet. You won't find them anywhere else. Now that we've cleared that up, let's dive into today's video. I've got 5 eerie stories about police officers and their chilling paranormal encounters. So turn off the lights, sit back, and imagine yourself in the shoes of these brave officers as they face the unknown. Let's get started. Story number 1. One night, we kept receiving calls from a house in the countryside. We had already been there twice, but the family living there insisted they hadn't called us. When the house called a third time, we decided to go back and investigate further. It was a slow night anyway. Back in the 1990s, many groups from Southeast Asia had just arrived to the United States. Many of these groups are still struggling with English. However, they knew that if they called 911 and hung up, the police would come to check on them. We thought perhaps someone in the house genuinely needed help. When we arrived, the family once again said they hadn't called. We asked if it would be okay to check the house just to ensure everything was all right, and they agreed. Not to generalize, but Asian people tend to comply more with authorities based on my years of experience. We inspected the house and found nothing unusual. Then we noticed light coming from an old storage shed or garage in the backyard. My partner Jenny and I went to knock on the shed's door. A teenage girl opened it. We asked her if she had called 911, but she said no. She spoke good English, which surprised us. We asked if she was okay, and she said she was. Then, behind her, we noticed a newborn baby. Jenny asked if she could take a closer look at the baby, and the girl agreed. When Jenny checked, the baby didn't look well. Concerned, we asked the girl why she and the baby were living in the shed instead of inside the house. The girl explained, through tears, that because she and her boyfriend weren't married, her parents wouldn't let her keep the baby inside their house. It's like bringing shame to the family for some cultures. To make matters worse, her boyfriend had refused to marry her. But then, she's underage anyway. Jenny gently told her that her baby was very sick and needed immediate medical attention. We took both the mother and baby to the hospital. Officer Jenny became deeply attached to the case and visited the young mother and her baby at the hospital. During one of those visits, the girl confided that she hadn't made the repeated calls to 911 that night because she didn't even have a phone in the shed. She also revealed that her grandmother had passed away 3 months earlier. She explained that when her grandparents were still alive, her grandmother would often call 911 and hang up whenever her grandfather became very sick. The girl tearfully suggested, "Maybe it was my grandma who called. Maybe she was trying to save my baby." After the mother and baby were discharged from the hospital, we helped connect her with public assistance to support them. This experience stayed with us for a long time, especially Jenny. It felt as though, somehow, the young girl's grandmother was still watching over her family, even after she had passed. Story number 2. I remember it was 2002. One day while patrolling the area near 7th Avenue, I got a phone call from our dispatcher, Shelley. She told me it was an urgent situation and gave me the address. Shelley said the caller, a woman, was still on the line with her, crying and threatening to kill herself. I quickly turned my car around and headed to the address Shelley had given me. While I was driving, Shelley kept me updated. She said the woman was still crying heavily and couldn't speak clearly. When I arrived at the location, Shelley told me the woman had just hung up the phone. I told Shelley I was already at the house. It was a small 2-story blue house in the countryside. I remembered this house vividly. 8 years ago, a little girl had fallen out of the 2nd-story window into the backyard and died. Just recalling that incident gave me goosebumps. When I knocked on the door, a little boy, around 5 years old, answered. Behind him was another boy, about 3 years old. I asked, "Hey, little fellows, where's your mom?" The older boy told me their mom was upstairs with the baby. When I noticed the kids were Asian, I realized this wasn't the same family from 8 years ago. The family back then was Hispanic. As I stood there, I heard a baby crying loudly from upstairs. I asked the older boy where their father was. He told me their dad had gone hunting. I then asked them to take me to where the baby was, but the boy said their mom didn't want them going upstairs. I gently closed the door and told the boys not to go anywhere. I reassured them that I was just going to check on their mom and the baby. When I got to the second floor, I found the room where the baby was crying, but the door was locked. I knocked several times, but no one answered. The baby just kept crying. I announced loudly, "I'm going to break the door," to warn anyone inside to move back. Then I kicked the door open. Inside, I saw a crooked bed with a baby girl, about 2 months old, crying on top of it. At the base of the bed frame, I noticed a rope tied securely to it, and the rope extended out through the window. The very same window where the little girl had fallen and died 8 years ago. The sight made my heart drop. I quickly picked up the baby from the bed and leaned out the window to look down. What I saw made my blood run cold. The mother was dangling from the side of the house, hanging by the rope. Thinking she might still be alive, I cut the rope, and she fell to the backyard. By the time I went downstairs, an ambulance and 2 fire trucks had arrived. Holding the baby in my arms, I directed the paramedics and firefighters to the backyard where her body was. 4 firefighters and 2 paramedics rushed back there. I didn't follow them because I had the baby, but a little while later, they wheeled the woman's body to the front covered with a white sheet. I asked the paramedics how long they thought she'd been dead. They estimated she'd been deceased for about 2 hours. Chills ran down my spine. She had just hung up the phone with our dispatcher when I arrived at the house. I went back inside and searched everywhere. There was only one home phone in the house, the one in the dining room. I asked the little boys if anyone had just used the phone. They both said no. If the mother had been dead for 2 hours, then who made that call? It was one of the strangest and most chilling experiences of my life. Later, we discovered that the woman had committed suicide due to postpartum depression. There were medications in her room, but the bottles were full, indicating she hadn't taken them. What made the situation even more unsettling was that she chose to hang herself from the same window where a little girl had fallen and died 8 years earlier. It's a memory that has stayed with me ever since. Story number 3. One morning at 3 a.m., we received a call from a woman who sounded extremely distressed. She said she had woken up to find her husband missing. She had discovered the back door wide open and noticed the kitchen drawer where they kept the knives was also open. She feared that her husband, who had lung cancer, might be wandering in the woods and trying to harm himself. Officer Mike and I arrived at the scene. The woman, visibly shaken, opened the door for us. She had already been outside in the backyard calling for her husband, but there had been no response. She looked as though she might collapse from sheer worry. Officer Mike sat with her on the bench on the front porch and called for an ambulance, just in case she needed medical attention. Meanwhile, I went around to check the backyard. It was fenced, but the fence was only about waist high. I jumped over it and started searching the wooded area behind their property. After walking for a while, I noticed a trail of blood. I began following it, hoping it would lead me to the missing man. As I followed the trail, I suddenly heard footsteps ahead, as if someone was walking away. I shone my flashlight in the direction of the noise, and saw a man wearing a white shirt and blue pajama pants. He was carrying what looked like a knife in his right hand. I shouted for him to stop, but he ignored me and began walking faster, weaving in a zigzag pattern through the woods. I started chasing after him and pulled out my taser for safety. Soon he disappeared behind a large tree, and it seemed like he was hiding there. Not wanting to risk being attacked, I kept my distance and ordered him to come out and show his hands. I repeated myself several times but saw no movement. Keeping my flashlight on the tree, I cautiously began circling it, trying to maintain a safe distance. However, when I got around the tree, there was no sign of him. He had vanished. Just then, Officer Mike radioed me. "Officer Lee, we found the man. He's inside the house." I backed away from the tree, keeping my flashlight trained on it as I retreated. Once I was at a safe distance, I turned and ran back toward the house. When I arrived, I saw Officer Mike helping the paramedics load the man onto a gurney. He was alive but looked weak from blood loss. To my shock, he was wearing the exact same white shirt and blue pajama pants as the figure I had seen in the woods. I asked Officer Mike what had happened. He explained that they had found the man hiding in the pantry and the kitchen. He had slit his wrist, but luckily, he had missed the main artery, though he had lost a significant amount of blood. Despite their efforts, the man later died at the hospital from some other health complications. Even now, I can't explain what I saw in the woods that night. The image of the man in the white shirt and blue pajama pants walking away and then vanishing still gives me goosebumps. Story number 4. One night, we received a call from a man who reported that his wife was acting crazy, as if she were possessed. He said she was upstairs, banging her head on the walls and acting violently. She had a pair of scissors, and he didn't want to have to confront her himself, so he asked us to come and help. Officer Thomas and I arrived at the scene and knocked on the door. The man opened it and told us his wife was upstairs in their bedroom. He showed us his arm, where his wife had stabbed him with the scissors. The injury wasn't severe, but it was bleeding quite a bit, as though a blood vessel had been punctured. While Officer Thomas went to grab the first aid kit from the car, I went upstairs to check on the wife. According to the man, she had locked herself in their bedroom, and their teenage daughter had also locked herself in her own room after an argument. It was a strange situation. The master bedroom was on the left, and the daughter's room was on the right. The daughter's name is Erica. When I got upstairs, I noticed the master bedroom door was open. I went in and saw that it had an attached bathroom, but the bathroom door was locked and the light was on inside. I knocked on the door, and after a few knocks, I heard the woman's voice from inside, telling me to go away and leave her alone. "Just go away. We don't need you here. Leave my family alone," she said in a soft, crying tone. I tried to reassure her and asked her to open the door so we could talk. Shortly after, Officer Thomas came upstairs, and we both clearly heard the same soft, crying voice telling us to go away. Suddenly, we heard the daughter, Erica, calling from her room. "Dad! Dad! Did you call the cops? Tell them to go away. Mom is okay. She's with me in my room. Dad?" Erica came out of her room just as her dad came up the stairs. "Dad, Mom is okay. She's in my room with me," she said. Officer Thomas and I exchanged a shocked look. The man and Erica went into her room and brought the wife out. Right then we asked, "If she's there, who's in the bathroom?" They looked confused and said there shouldn't be anyone in the bathroom. The man unlocked the bathroom door for us, and it was completely empty. On the floor there was a pair of scissors and clumps of hair. It seemed like the wife had been in there earlier, cutting her own hair in frustration. Officer Thomas and I were stunned. We had both clearly heard a woman sobbing and telling us to leave. To make a long story short, the wife was taken to the hospital for evaluation. That family probably moved out after that incident. About a year later, a new family moved into the house. One early morning we got another call. A man had been rushed to the hospital because his sleepwalking wife had stabbed him in his sleep with a scissor. She woke up from what appeared to be a sleepwalking state and immediately called for an ambulance. Fortunately, the man survived. According to my old supervisor, the house had a history. Years earlier, a woman had committed suicide in the master bathroom after discovering her husband had been unfaithful. As a police officer for over 12 years, this remains one of the experiences that still gives me chills to this day. Story number 5. One night on July 4th, my partner Jonah and I were called to a house for a danger-to-self situation involving a woman. We often get these kinds of calls. Usually, we just ensure everything is under control and transport the individual to the hospital for a psychiatric evaluation. When we arrived at the house, we heard screaming from inside. After knocking on the door, 2 little kids opened it. We asked if they were okay, and they just nodded, but they looked terrified. As we stepped into the living room, we saw the father standing in the hallway, pleading with his wife, who had locked herself in their bedroom. The husband told us that she had gone into the room with a knife and locked the door. We started knocking on the door, but by this time, the screaming had stopped. The husband used a coin to unlock the bedroom door for us, and we had our tasers ready in case she charged at us with the knife. When the door opened, we turned on the light and saw her lying on the bed, dressed in traditional funeral clothes for some strange reasons. She had the tip of the knife in her mouth, biting down on it, and there was blood all over her pillow. Jonah and I tried to talk to her, asking her to let go of the knife, but she wouldn't respond. Since she was a small woman, I moved in quickly and grabbed her right wrist, while Jonah restrained her left wrist. She finally released the knife, and we helped her out of bed. She didn't resist further, and we stayed with her in the room until the ambulance arrived. The husband told us that his wife was possessed by the ghost of her grandmother. He explained that his wife was a normal person every day of the year, but every July 4th, she would go crazy. When we asked why, he shared that his wife's grandmother had also been possessed and mentally unstable back in Southeast Asia. Because of this, the family kept her tied up inside a small hut outside their house. During the Vietnam War, when the Vietnamese army attacked their village, the family fled in a panic, leaving the grandmother tied up in the hut. The grandmother was very scared and died from a heart attack in the hut. The husband said that every year, the sound of fireworks triggers his wife because they remind her grandmother's ghost of the gunfire from that day. Since the grandmother's ghost still possessed his wife, an elder shaman had told him that the grandmother's ghost was still terrified, reliving the moment she was tied up and abandoned while hearing the gunshots outside. That's all for this video. Thank you for making all the way through and supporting my stories. Have a wonderful day or night.